Hello, security pros, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's Government Insider webinar, How Will the Trump Economy Compare to Biden? I'm Demi Norris, a marketing specialist at ESA, and I'm excited to lead this webinar today. Before we dive in, I'd like to provide some tips for you joining us for your first ESA webinar. First of all, welcome. You will be muted for the duration of this session, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. If a question or comment comes to mind at any point during today's session, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ensure that we save some time for your questions with our experts today. We'll also be recording this webinar so you can rewatch on-demand sessions and share it with your colleagues. Tomorrow, you will receive an email thanking you for your attendance today with a link to the recording to share. Also, don't miss out on the opportunity to join us at ESX 2025, taking place on June 16th to 19th in Cobb County, Georgia, home of the Atlanta Braves. ESX is the premier event for electronic security and life safety professionals, with engaging sessions, valuable networking opportunities, and cutting-edge technology. ESX promises to be unforgettable. Make sure you register before April 18th to ensure the lowest pass prices. We at ESA realize that your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of that time with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to our VP of Advocacy and Public Affairs, Drake Braunger.
All right. Well, thank you, Demi. And hello and welcome back, ESA members. If this is your first Government Insider episode, I'm glad to be able to welcome you to it because we've got a very special guest, a former colleague of mine, Holly Wade. Holly actually was on Government Insider last February. And we'll be taking a look at the U.S. economy again and kind of giving you guys kind of the latest and greatest from the NFIB specialist. And I'll just mention real quick that Holly is the executive director of NFIB Research Center, where she has 18 years, should that be 19 years now?
Conducting 19 now.
Yeah, 19. Sorry, I should have updated that from last year. Yeah.
All right.
19 years of experience conducting original research on the small business sector, focusing on small business economic conditions, business operations, public policy issues impacting small firms, and public policy issues impacting small firms. She produces NFIB's monthly Small Business Economic Trends publication. Do you guys still do the COVID-19 Small Business Survey Series?
We don't. No, we do have them online, but thankfully we are done with that series.
I'm glad we've moved past that one for sure. Yes. And then the surveys and topics related to other small business operations. She's a frequent media spokesperson on the small business economy and related public policy issues. And since 2020, Ms. Wade has been offering a regular webinar series for small business owners nationwide, helping owners navigate through the federal loan and tax credit programs. And she's also a member of the board of directors of the Global Interdependence Center, the GIC, and a former board member of the National Association of Business Economics, NABE, where she is the co-chair of the Small Business Roundtable. So Holly, thank you, and I apologize. I will update your resume for the next time I bring you.
Oh, no problem. It's great to be with you.
All right. Well, let's jump right back into the Small Business Optimism Index, the NFIB monthly report. Could you tell us what it is that NFIB does with that? What research you guys are conducting with it?
Sure. So thank you for that great introduction. We, at the NFIB Research Center, we've produced a survey of a random sample of our membership, around 300,000 members across the country and across industry. And we randomly sample each month and send out a questionnaire asking them roughly 40 questions related to their business operations, and then also about the economy in general, how they think of business conditions, expansion opportunities, but also what they expect for sales, for employees, for compensation, if they're increasing, decreasing, and then also what their top business issue is currently, whether that's inflation or labor or things like that. So we've sent out this survey for 50 years, amazingly, or actually 51 years. I need to update it in my head here. And our chief economist, Bill Dunkelberg, had created this survey in 1973. And it's been a wonderful tool for us to better understand the small business sector and how they're moving through the economy with all the different changes that happen through business cycles and, economic shocks that unfortunately we have experienced in the last 4 years. So we're able to navigate what current conditions look like, compared to conditions in the past.
Okay, well, great. Well, and obviously for this episode, we're going to be kind of talking about how we were in the Biden economy. There was an election, and that seemed to have changed a little bit of the optimism amongst small business owners. And I'll just remind our viewers, if you do have a question on the economy, go ahead and type it in the chat. Demi's going to pull some of those questions here in a bit, so we'll give you a moment to think of any questions you got that you'd like Holly to try and answer. But the latest data from the Small Business Optimism Index is from November. I understand December's coming out next week, right? But the latest update was that the optimism ticked up above the average. Is that correct?
It is. So as you mentioned, our November data, next Tuesday we'll be releasing the December data, but our November data showed our index of small business optimism, which is basically our headline measure of the health of the small business economy. And we had roughly 34 months, consecutive months of the average index number below the average of the last 50 years. So it had been below the average of 98. 98 is just, a number of what it looks like, how we measure. And it spiked to 101.7. It was a huge jump from where we were. It was actually from October to November, the largest monthly increase in the history of the survey. So not surprisingly, the last 4 years of kind of just general optimism in the business community, especially among small business, hasn't been all that supportive. So they've felt, kind of anxious about they are looking ahead as far as, whether those tax cuts are expiring or the regulatory burdens that they're experiencing. And so our index had been at very low levels for a very long time. After the election, we saw this incredible spike in optimism, similar to what we saw in 2016. However, this one was just even more dramatic. So it's a measurable increase in optimism, business owners looking forward, anticipating business conditions improving over the next 6 months.
So would it be fair to say that these are historic numbers, greatest numbers NFIB's ever seen, tremendous numbers? It's all because of President Trump. Can we say there's a causation here, or is it just a strong correlation?
No, certainly it was a direct result of the election. Small business owners were desperate for a change in priorities by the administration by Congress. They had been under, the previous administration for 4 years, really desperate for some relief. They were dealing with labor shortages and inflation, but also the regulatory environment that was causing a lot of pressures. For instance, beneficial ownership, that Corporate Transparency Act that required businesses to file ownership information, the paperwork burden, the trying to figure out how to comply or if they need to comply with some of the regulations that were coming out of the current administration, were putting a lot of pressure on small business owners when they're trying to manage operations themselves, especially with many of them short-staffed. The business owner was having to contribute more into the business. So certainly the elections alleviated a lot of that anxiety that they were feeling. We also have the uncertainty index. So this is our uncertainty index that we put together a number of years ago, measures those small business owners, some of the questions where they are answering uncertain, I don't know, I'm not sure. Those were the answers that are part of this uncertainty index. And in October, the index was an all-time 50-year record high. So the uncertainty exactly, it was huge. And he would have every right to to say it in those terms. They were uncertain about how they could move forward, whether they should invest in their business, expand their business, hire that next employee when they have a job opening available, but not knowing what costs are coming down the line that would impact their ability to invest in their business. The earnings of a business are their number one and primary tool in financing expansion opportunities and investing in their business. So not knowing whether, those tax extensions or taxes would be extended, those tax cuts from 2019, or just, the cost of regulatory compliance that we hear from so many small business owners that has, increased as far as burden, not only on federal level, but also on the state level. So certainly, this was a direct result of the election. They have a lot of expectations, though, going into 2025 on what they want out of Congress and the new administration to help support their ability to operate their business going forward.
Well, and so I'm going to ask you the probably the $50 million question, because we've heard a lot about this Trump 2.0 presidency, as I'm kind of calling it. There's going to be a large increase in tariffs, maybe. They're going to cut some regulations. We'll see. And then you have this new unofficial DOGE group, Department of Government Accountability or no, Efficiency, excuse me. Not an official department, but it's a group led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the former presidential candidate, advising that they're suggesting that they're going to find trillions of dollars to cut in spending. And of course, Congress has that very narrow or very slim majority in the House. So we'll see. But can anything be forecasted yet in terms of what the expectations are for the business climate coming up?
Well, for small business owners looking at, let's start with the regulatory environment. So, whether they will be able to cut out some of the regulations that were in the pipeline or, that are on the books right now. The promise that they won't increase the regulatory burden was a huge relief for small business owners. So just even the fact that they won't initiate further regulations that will impact their ability to operate their business is a huge stress relief. So that's number one. And then also the promise of, kind of extending those tax cuts, preserving those tax cuts that have been so helpful. That's another huge promise that they are expecting Congress and the administration to follow through on. And, we know that nothing in DC is a straight line. So who knows what this looks like as far as the process by which they have to go about passing legislation, signing it into law, and the whole negotiation aspect to this. But, they're expecting Congress and the administration to follow through on that promise. Mm-hmm. The tariffs and even immigration reform, those are the two areas that are kind of out there being discussed. We don't have details as far as what is likely to be expected. And, sometimes even if anything, if it transpires in a way that would impact small business. Tariffs are certainly, if those promises that he's talked about during the campaign and he follows through with them, any tariffs will impact small business directly or indirectly if those products or products that have tariffs placed on them, are in line with, what a small business owner needs as an input for operating their business. So what is largely unknown is the breadth and the amount of increase in these tariffs. So if it's kind of across the board 20% tariff on all incoming products, that's certainly going to be a huge issue for a lot of small business owners, especially when we've already seen that business owners in this last Problems and Priority survey that we published mid last year showed that the cost of supplies and inventories was their number 2 critical issue in operating their business. So we know that cost inputs of supplies and inventories are a particular problem, and tariffs would, exacerbate that issue. But again, we have very few details of what that looks like. Those conversations are ongoing. DOGE, who knew that we'd be saying the word DOGE about, 5 times a day, every week of our lives over the last number of months. It's interesting to see how they're the progress of which they're trying to maneuver and figure out ways to make DC more efficient, which, I think is something that most business owners certainly are interested in, seeing less federal government in the ways that would ease up their ability to operate their business. So if it's, if it's pursued in a way that alleviate some of the pressures of business owners and, kind of curbs the deficits, the yearly deficits, helps manage our growing debt. Those would obviously all be positive signs. But again, it's still a lot of conversation, not a whole lot of details with how they're going to go about reducing the level of federal government and in which areas that they would target. So a lot of outstanding details that are still being developed. We're certainly going to be making sure that we understand where the conversations are and what those conversations look like, as I'm sure you will. And so the main priorities, though, less government regulations on the federal level, extending those tax cuts. Those are the promises right now that are of immediate concern to small business owners, our members, that they tell us every day. And so that's where a lot of our attention, most of our attention is focused, is making sure that they follow through on those promises.
Well, and I know NFIB was very instrumental in fighting to support the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the Trump tax cuts, as many people refer to them. ESA plans on supporting the renewal of them as well and extending them. But there's a key component of that, and I know a lot of the ESA members are small and medium-sized businesses, and maybe they paid the income tax rates. So they certainly can see, okay, income tax rates came down through that. That's great. Let's extend that. But there's another big piece of it, the small business tax deduction. And as you've told me before, sometimes we have to kind of re-explain some of these components of this tax cuts. And so how important is that? And is it, well, how about, what is that? And how important is it going to be for small business owners that we get that extended?
Sure. So the 20% small business deduction is a 20% deduction on qualifying business income for those businesses that are structured as pass-throughs. So basically, any business that's not structured as a C corporation can benefit or can be eligible for this deduction. So it's a 20%, again, 20% deduction on qualifying business income. And that's been in effect since 2017, and it was part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And it expires at the end of 2025, along with the adjustments going higher of the individual tax rates. So the burden of letting this expire would raise all small businesses out there, because most of them are organized as pass-through entities. And so the corporate rate, 21%, although it was pretty amusing that before the 2017 tax cut, when we were talking about, the landscape of what this legislation looked like, and that the lowering of the corporate tax rate was going to be permanent. And we were talking to small business owners who were structured as a C corp, and we said, yeah, the 20% or the 21% corporate tax rate is in legislation to be permanent. And they were like, permanent until it's not permanent. What does permanent mean? So, I think that's also going to be on the negotiating table, see what that looks like. I know that, Candidate Trump had talked about that, he was supportive of even lowering that, lower than 21%. So kind of everything's on the table, but the critical part of it that will, without congressional action, be dissolved are the tax cuts for those pass-through businesses. And so we know that, most businesses, because the tax code is so complicated, they gather up all their paperwork and all their information, and they hand it over to their CPA or accountant, tax professional to file. And so there are a decent population of small business owners that don't know that this tax cut, the 20% small business tax deduction, is in place. It will impact their business. So we certainly encourage business owners to talk with their tax professional, and then also to let their elected official know how important it is for them to keep these tax cuts in place, preserve those tax cuts that were afforded in 2017 that are scheduled to expire at the end of the year. So that is one of those areas that, we are working fervently to make sure that Congress knows the urgency of this, And we also know that, again, as I said before, nothing in DC is in a straight line. So there are a lot of expectations and even promises that, in the first 100 days, a lot of this will hopefully be resolved to get passed. But we know that it can be very messy, and there are a lot of priorities on the table. Tax cuts being one of those, extending those tax provisions being one of a few kind of big ticket items. So making sure that Congress and elected officials understand that this is a priority for small business owners is hugely helpful in getting this through. And we'll certainly be on top of it to make sure that it is, because again, the money that they have within their business is their primary tool of investing in their business. And so we want to make sure that they have all those dollars in place for them.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. If you have a CPA and you've liked what your tax bill has looked like a little bit more over the last few years, it might not be any wizardry on their part. It might be the small business tax deduction you've been benefiting from. So get to know that issue a little bit, ESA members, so that you can speak to your elected officials about that and how important it is for your business, especially as you look to grow and develop your business further. Another issue I know that's a long time issue, it feels like at this point, I know certainly back when I was at NFIB, it was the ability to find good workers. And it's an issue that has followed us here to ESA to be able to find skilled technicians to enter the field and to keep these jobs. We saw last time you were on that unemployment was low, and it has risen a little bit to kind of close out the year. I think the latest number was 4.2 that I saw. Now, is this a positive sign for businesses that are looking to fill positions finally, that maybe there's a little bit more of a few more workers in the pool, or is this kind of just part of the gradual cool down as it relates to inflation?
I think both. It's the gradual cool down that, with the inflation pressures, the labor market has eased up a bit. It's still a very tight labor market, though. I mean, we still have roughly 1 in 5 of our members telling us that labor quality is their top challenge in operating their business, unable to fill those open positions that are still at very high levels, and having to compete with benefits and salaries with, larger companies that often are able to provide, bigger compensation packages. So the competition for talent is still significant out there for many small business owners, especially in certain industries, including transportation, construction, manufacturing. They're the industries that we see for small business owners kind of at the top of the list as far as the number of them that have job openings. But the 4.2 unemployment rate, it has, as you mentioned, ticked up a bit over this last year, but it's still very low. We still have a very healthy labor market. But it is a challenge. It's still a challenge for many small business owners in finding the talent, in filling those positions. Thankfully, we've heard from many of them who have said that the number of applications that they're receiving for those open positions are increasing. So that's a good sign for small business owners. And then also for others, looking to use independent contractors or temporary workers and, different scenarios like that, that hopefully with the new administration and, maybe not so focused on the regulatory environment for Department of Labor, that it will help at least alleviate some of the stress that small business owners have had about kind of the regulatory compliance element of adding employees to their payroll. And so with a bit of loosening of the labor market, I think this will help small business owners compete for talent. And there are still historically high levels that are looking to fill those positions.
Okay. Well, I know as we talked a little bit about inflation. Federal Reserve Chief Jerome Powell announced in December that they're going to cut rates, and that the new policy rate was in the 4.25, 4.5% range. However, they also said, and I also remember speaking as we continue this theme of the Biden to the Trump economy. I remember candidate Trump was very upset at the initial Federal Reserve deciding to cut rates. I'm guessing he's now a little happier because he won and the rates are still coming down. But the Federal Reserve kind of is predicting that maybe only 1 or 2 cuts next year, they're going to be a little bit more cautious moving forward. What does this mean for a small business?
Sure. So yes, it does appear that they will be scaling back. They scaled back in 2024 with the expected number of rate cuts that many had projected, and that looks to be kind of continue through 2025. Basically because inflation rates, they've leveled off a bit, and so we aren't seeing the kind of decline to that 2% target that the Fed's looking for with inflation, and it's getting a bit sticky. So, to help move that forward, to get inflation back down, they might not cut as much as they anticipated before. So for small business owners, the cost of financing for those who are, have a line of credit or looking for a term business loan, this is an important factor for them in trying to figure out how to absorb those increased costs that, we all still remember how low rates were pre-pandemic, even through some of the first part of the pandemic. And now it's costing a lot more to finance some of the projects that you're looking for kind of more traditional financing. But not only for small business owners, I mean, in our problems and priorities survey, we did see a huge jump in the number of small business owners saying that interest rates were a problem in operating their business and trying to absorb those costs, but not all for the business owners in their financing costs, but for their customers. So if a business has customers who typically finance their product or service, that has been impacting the number of customers that are, trying to figure out how they're absorbing those higher financing costs too. So it's on both sides of the coin. Obviously, there are more small business owners on the financing side that are looking to try and figure out how to absorb this cost. It should, be a bit easier going forward. You won't see any increases as far as we understand it, in the future. But the gradual decline, it's not going to be back where we saw financing costs pre-pandemic. That seems to be a long ways off until the Fed feels comfortable in where they're at as far as the target. But I think those days are kind of long gone. But hopefully there's still a bit more relief in the next year as far as those costs. We'll see. They estimated that in 2025, the number of rate cuts were higher than they are now. So you never know. We'll see how the economy develops, how inflation evolves over the next 6 months. But it does appear that, where we are as far as interest rates for financing costs will remain likely around where they are, maybe a bit lower over the next 12 months.
Okay. Well, I know we're up against the clock, so we just have a few more minutes, but I did want to check in with Demi to see if we did have any questions come in.
We do have a few. So the first one is, what happened to the supply chain distributions? They were here for a while, but we don't hear as much about them.
I'm guessing probably supply chain disruptions. That was something we were hearing about, where a tanker got trapped in the Suez Canal. We had ships all over the coast of the Panama Canal just waiting to get through. And I remember hearing about this all through COVID, that one of the reasons for inflation was supply chain disruptions. Can you talk a little bit about is it fixed, Holly? Is everyone getting
Well,
their
it's
stuff
never
done?
quite fixed. There's always a disruption somewhere in the world that impacts the flow of commerce somewhere with some products. Thankfully, it's a whole lot better than what we experienced, 4 years ago. So we did include a question in our survey, in our monthly survey, about supply chain disruptions and how they're impacting small businesses. And we've seen a sharp reduction in the number of small businesses saying that they're significantly impacted by supply chain disruptions. But some of the outstanding issues that are still risks as far as supply chain disruptions go are, say, the strikes for the port workers and things like that could impact small business owners' ability to get their goods off those cargo ships. And then also just kind of international commerce with the new administration in some of their trade policies, that might impact supply chains, depending on, kind of the severity of it, or, it might not impact many. So there are still some risks. There's always risks related to supply chain disruptions. Right now, they're pretty mild as far as that goes. And, that's one of the areas where for small businesses, they're pretty tied to the suppliers that they have, and often have used the same suppliers for decades. And so being able to navigate if there is a disruption is particularly difficult for small firms. So they've gone through the last 4 years, which have been just horrendous when it comes to supply chain disruptions, and we're in a far better situation now than we were, and hope that that continues.
Yeah, it feels like forever ago, but I remember the stories all over when the ship ran in, was it in Baltimore, and destroyed
Oh
the
my gosh,
bridge?
yes.
Yeah. But it feels like forever ago. But the impacts are still being felt, I'm sure, to a degree, even as they continue to recover from that. Demi, I know because we're kind of at time, let's just do one more question. Do you have anything else?
Okay. Would Trump taking over the Panama Canal, be a major game changer for trade?
Yes, apparently, President Trump, candidate, soon to be again, President Trump, has made several comments recently about taking over Canada, Greenland, and the Panama Canal. Is Yeah, I'll just Holly, are we going to take over the Panama Canal?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I mean, it is a major throughway for trade in, cutting down the time of ships going around South America. So, those negotiations, I think, will be interesting to hear how they develop. But I would suspect that the Panama Canal will be open for business in 2025 going forward. It is one of the major arteries that, so many folks rely on in moving goods across the world.
All right. Well, Holly, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I hope some of the ESA members feel a little bit more informed about these issues, especially the tax cuts debate that's going to be coming up. As you point out, it's never a straight road. I'm expecting them to kind of sit on this, and it's going to be a long, dragged out fight throughout the year. But hopefully they get it done before the end of the year, obviously before they expire. That's going to be the goal. But anything you'd like to mention, or anything the small business owners should keep an eye on, kind of as we move forward? As you mentioned, the December date is going to be coming out next week, or anything you want to tell them keep an eye on this year?
Sure. I would just suggest that for business owners, we have certainly a more friendly administration, more friendly Congress moving forward. Small business owners are optimistic, but making sure that your elected officials know the priorities that you have and what you're expecting them to do moving forward is hugely important. So they have fresh in their mind that the business community is expecting them to do a lot in this first year to help them operate their business.
Absolutely, well said. Yeah, it's going to be a big year for them. We're going to see what they can do, and I do not envy the job that Speaker Johnson's going to have to try and keep that entire caucus together.
Me
I think
neither.
they've got
He has his work
about
cut
4 or
out
5
for him.
votes to play with, so not much. But well, Holly, thanks again for joining us. I've been Jake Braunger. I am Jake Braunger. I've been your host though here on Government Insider, and we'll look forward to seeing you for our next episode, everyone, and that'll be in March. We'll see you then.